My job tonight really is going to be about giving you an update of the facts and finds. So we've been incredibly busy this year. We've done a huge amount for the Living Lomonds Archaeology Programme, and there's been a massive amount of new discoveries and a huge amount of effort's gone into it. So there's three things that I really want you to take away from tonight, and it's kind of a challenge for myself. Some of you may completely agree with these points, and that's great. I'm not going to preach you converted, but I would be absolutely thrilled if you came away tonight with a strong understanding that your castle here at Lochore Castle is a really important site. I mean, obviously we all know it's an important monument, it's scheduled, but I just wanted to stress the fact that it's actually what originally was pretty big and historically had a really important role, regionally anyway, within Fife. The other thing that I want to stress to you is that some of the finds that we've made are really quite extraordinary in the context of the site, but also we've begun to contribute a great deal to the kind of national research agenda among archaeologists. There's a lot of excitement among archaeologists for what we've been discovering, and we've had a lot of interest. So I'd be thrilled if you agreed with me on that point. And the other thing that I really wanted to stress, and just by way of saying thank you tonight, we're not just talking nuts and bolts of archaeology, but we've had an amazing effort. I mean, there's been a huge amount of effort in this project. It's not just about me as an archaeologist coming along and digging up a site and doing lots of work that's interesting for me. This could not have happened without the efforts of a very large number of people given their free time. So hopefully you'll come away with a sense just how amazing that help has been, and also just how much fun we've had doing this project as well. So I think that a lot of archaeologists sometimes forget this is all quite good fun as well. The size of the site originally was quite extensive. So the first thing we did, as Ed said, was clear it. And last year in autumn I was helping supervise, not necessarily part of the archaeology job I've got, but stepped in and we helped supervise clear out. And there was a huge amount of brush was removed, undergrowth, and the trees around the castle have eventually been cut down. And that's revealed just how extensive the towers were, because there was vegetation all over this, but the main thing it's shown us is it's allowed us, as Ed said, to define the parameters of the site. So it's got this large curtain wall that originally encircled it, and it's got a large number of other buildings in the main courtyard. So it's not just the tower we're talking about, although you can see the remains of the four corners still standing. There was a very highly defended fortification around this building. And I love this wee slide. It's slightly out of focus because the drone that took it was moving around quite a lot. But it hopefully gives you a sense of the scale that I'm talking about. So it's under scaffolding. You see the wall here coming around, this oval wall, buildings in here. It's about 150 feet across this site, all in. That's about 50 metres. And that's not a pokey wee local castle. That's an important place. So we've also done some fancy technology things on the site. We've been working with St Andrews University before we did the dig, and this is a photogrammetric model. So this will be available online, and I think there's links through our Facebook page as well. And when you look at it online, you can actually move this around. So this is a physical record of the building before we started doing work, before the scaffolding went up. And again, it shows us just how extensive the remains are. And when we come in, we can walk around and actually see how the scale of the tower, it was imposing before us. Because the other thing about this site is that it was on an island originally. And that's not immediately obvious when you see it. But when we look at the historic records for the site, we can see how extensive Lochore was. It was drained in 1792 onwards. And the castle itself sat on the island in the east end near the shore where the outflow was towards Cross Hill is today. So now we're going to talk about what we've been doing. So we started, as often geophysicists do, with a survey. Before we put trenches in the ground, we want to know what's under the ground as much as we can, so we can target our work. And we had a lot of help with it. You see Jim and Mary are working away here, surveying our resistivity survey. And here's some of the results. I'm not going to dwell on these too much, because I have talked about it before. But suffice to say, resistance survey is an electrical device. It passes a current through the ground, and how that current is affected tells you a bit about what's there. So when it's stopped from flowing, you can assume that there's harder objects under the ground, stone and the like. And what we found was, so here's the castle keep and the walls, we found what looks like the edge of the island. So there's the bank of the shoreline of the island, and we found the line of the barmkin here, and all these blobs, trust me, I'm a professional, these represent buildings within the court. So we managed to uncover some additional information about that. Sadly, we couldn't do our dig inside the keep area because it's just too dangerous until we consolidated it. But suffice to say, we got a new plan, so a possible new plan of the castle. And there were a number of features around the island shoreline that we thought, well, maybe we could have some little harbours here. Maybe there's a causeway because we've got some high signals in that area. So we targeted our dig based around these ideas. I won't lie to you, some of these ideas turned out to be slightly more hazy than others, but nonetheless it was a really worthwhile process because it allowed us to approach the site without damaging it unnecessarily. So here's where we put our trenches. Yeah, we put our trenches in 3 places. It's a relatively small dig, this, but nonetheless, because we had the information, we could get as much data out of them as we could. So trench A, we put across a section of the barmkin which had collapsed, and that created an opportunity really for us. We could try and tell, how was the barmkin made? Did it have lots of phases? Was it built loads of times? How old was it? And also it gave us an opportunity to look inside the island itself. So what we wanted to try and say was, you know, is this a natural island? Was it man-made? What's it made of? How much occupation is actually on the site? So that was trench A. Trench B was what we call a tower trench, and you'll remember one of our round towers here we got a really good signal from. So that was a bit more straightforward. How old is the tower? Could we find any bits of the tower which could tell us more about how it was made? And also we could sample the inside of the castle courtyard itself. And trench C, our big trench, was looking for the harbour, and we did a lot of work trying to understand the shoreline there. But I'm not going to hold back anymore. Here's trench A. So this is a vertical aerial shot of the trench. And this is it with its first kind of removal of all the modern layers and its slot that we put on its side. Just to guide your eyes here, the castle is in that direction. This is a slope. And this line marks where the barmkin went. So here we are, here's the wall. It's been heavily robbed out, as you might expect from Mr. Park's, Captain Park's works on the site. So most of this side had been knocked out. But hopefully you can see that we've got this very well defined face of mortar. And it turned out to be quite an interesting wee trench, this. So we did it by the book. It's been planned. So here's one of our plans that the volunteers were doing. And it managed to identify each individual stone which was actually in situ and those stones that had been robbed away. So the outer face of the actual wall had completely gone. And around this area it was a mass of coal clinker and mining bin that had been spread over it. So there was quite a bit of work to get through there. And what we really wanted to do with this trench, as I said, was to get down into the actual fabric of this structure. So Historic Scotland, now Historic Environment Scotland, gave us permission to go through into the wall, and we actually managed to sample into that. And that told us actually it was quite a straightforward story. It's a single-phased, very well constructed wall, about 1.5 meters across. It would have been a very substantial obstacle in its day. It's made with a mixture of dressed sandstone blocks and dolerite rubble, and it's a fairly substantial thing. But the real surprises came when we looked down on the inside. So we had all this is demolition material here, folks, and then we got occupation deposits up against the cut of the wall. So we've got a series of very finely banded occupation deposits. Lots of demolished mortar mixed in there and bits of building material which allowed us to say a bit about what the building would have looked like originally. But one of the big surprises for me anyway is when we got through all of that was we had this massive layer of laid boulders. And these have been set in this position. These are basalt boulders, not like anything else on the site. And these extended all the way under the wall, all the way down the slope of the island. They actually formed the body of the bank of the island at this point. And in between these stones was charcoal and bits of preserved brushwood as well. So we sampled all those. And it raised the question, is this the man-made island that we're looking for? At least at this part of the island, this bit certainly looks the case. And this all predated the castle wall. But here's some of the things that we found telling us about the building itself. So this is just one of a variety of bits of window glass that we turned up. And it looks pretty black and nasty today. That's because it's called lead light, so it's degraded over time. But this was probably the best preserved element we got, which is a single diamond pane of window glass, and there would have been lead cames along here. It gives you a sense, and in an ecclesiastical context at least, what it would have looked like. So this reminds us that at least in the 15th century, when this probably was made, that the castle was quite rare in the sense that most windowed buildings at the time would only be large ecclesiastical structures or elite residences of this type. So this is probably a slot window in the tower, which has its own little lead light worked into it. So that's a lovely wee find. We've got a lot of these as well. These are shingles, slates from the roof of the building. And probably the ranges as well as the tower were roofed with these large Scottish slates. They're probably Highland Scottish slates. And they've got these peg holes, which is the main diagnostic feature. So you see they've been roughly hewed along the side here. And variously discussed, I've talked to a few specialists about this, but it's likely that they will be wooden pegs, at least in the earlier phases. And we could see the kind of effect that would have been created from these. So it's a nice reminder about just how big this building is, well, because this is just part of the corner of one, so this would come all the way down here. And some of these around the tower we found about this big as well, so, you know, substantially built structure. This is our little roadier skull that we found from our Barmkin trench. It has been butchered, I'm afraid, and there are bits of the remains of an antler root at the side here. But what's significant about this is that in the medieval period, this came from a medieval lair. As you may well know, it was a legal right to hunt deer. You had an exclusive rights to these animals. And it is part and parcel of an elite feasting culture that the feasting of deer was worked into that, and we could see illustrations of that. So it makes us wonder, one of the things about the resources around Lochore is it probably had great hunting grounds as well. Perhaps there were hunting grounds up onto Benarty Hill in the local area. I don't know what the local deer park was in the area, but it would be an interesting area of further research. So little finds like this start to open up the story of the site a great deal. So that small trench gave us a lot of information. Trench B was much bigger and required a huge amount of soil to be removed. So here's it at the beginning. We've got a lot of overburden of modern topsoil and rubble. And here it is once we had got right down onto the good archaeological levels. So it was a huge effort everybody put in on this trench. And as you can see, this is an aerial shot. This is the outline of our tower. And it was more better preserved than I expected in some areas, although it had been substantially robbed. So this big gap here in the stones is where it's all been robbed away. And hopefully you see there are still some stones in situ. We've also got these stones here. We think we've got the footings of what was a postern gate here. So we know that there was a little gate here, and we've got the kind of footings remains of it. This is a little secret gate tucked in beside the tower. And we also got this large boulder layer, this basalt layer, very similar to the one we had in the former trench. Some of it had been laid to create foundations here, but the great majority of it made up the body of the island itself. So again, are we looking at a man-made element, at least to the boundaries of the island itself? So what else did this trench tell us about it? Well, we took, again, a detailed record. It's one of our plans, and we were able to identify where the facing stones of the tower were. So we've got a great record of this site, and we're going to be producing, we've got one report, which is the non-technical report. There's another coming, which will have a lot of this technical information I'm showing you at the moment. So here's a more zoomed in view, and we were really pleased because some of the castle was still standing in this area. When we swoop round here, we've got these two courses of the face of the tower coming round. Can you see that? And the interior face of the tower itself was also preserved at this element. And it's locked into the butts of the barnkin wall here. And we found some really nice things in the rubble here. Here's Sue. Sue's in the front row if anyone wants to ask her about this find. This was one of our star finds from this area. So next to the wall, this had all been covered in rubble. Huge amounts of mixed rubble, lots of mortar, shell worked into some of this mortar, and lodged in amongst that was this carved stone, finely carved stone. This turned out to be quite a nicely made thing. As you can see, this little right angled form, we think this is the way up it went. The other sides of it have still mortar adhering to it, so it's been built into a wall, and it has this little chevroned curving aspect to it here, coming down to a terminus there. Given its location, and it looks probably late medieval, it's sitting right next to this tower here, so it's found just down here, below one of our gun loops. No prizes for guessing what I'm going to suggest, but I think this is probably what we've got. It's sitting right at the base of one of our gun loops. So either this is an adapted arrow slit that's been made into a gun loop. Either way, we, I think, have the base of one of them. And just to stress, okay, it's a small stone, but this is the first piece of carved masonry from this site. It's the first piece of diagnostic masonry. It's a brilliant find, and that should end up in a museum, I would bet. So here's an idea about what it would have looked like originally. So this is the orientation point where you can guide your gun. And here's some of our volunteers that were washing a lot of the finds and sorting out just which piece went where and which layer it came from. That's what we've been doing after the dig. And a few of them are diagnostic. This is rather sad, knocked about bit of pot, but we found it quite early on. It created quite a lot of excitement. We knew we were getting into the good stuff. This is a green glazed piece of pottery, probably from a handle, a strap handle. And this kind of pottery is very common in Scotland, in fact up the North Sea coast. It's the kind of material that was being produced in Yorkshire a great deal from the sort of 13th, 14th century, and was being imported up the coastal boroughs. So it's not a surprise that we're finding an important site like this. This was found by one of our young volunteers, Douglas Bowden Smith. Very pleased with himself, get that, and rightly so. Other ceramic finds we got. This little gaming piece came from the rubble layer at the base of the trench, so it had been jumbled up and spread about, but nonetheless it's significant because it tells us a bit about the post-medieval history of this site. As the name suggests, a gaming piece. It's probably used in a board game of some kind, perhaps some form of taffel, but they're also known to be used in knucklebones, you know, the catching game, and they're found very widely throughout the country. So I found initially, there's going to be more work done on this, initial little example from the Portfolio Antiquities scheme in Kent, which is about 1600 or so. So it tells us, you know, it's not just a military site, there's leisurely activities going on here, and also by the time this thing's been used, the castle might have been abandoned even, so it may tell us that people visited it for leisurely purposes, or maybe it was a good hideout, we don't know, but little stories can be orientated around finds like this, and they remind us about the multiplicity of stories that are played out at these places. And we move forward in time with this trench. We found a huge amount of recent history, and a lot of these examples, really fine examples of clay smoking pipes. So here's Mary and Morgan displaying some of the finer finds of these examples, and this one in particular was probably one of our best. This is Edward VII coronation pipe. So you can just imagine, you know, there's a miner coming along, he's finished his day's work, his pipe neck's broken, chucks it in the tip next to the site, and it ends up and we find it 100 or so years later. So moving on to our third trench, the harbour trench, inverted commas for reasons here, folks. We had a huge amount to get through with this trench, and in fact more than we necessarily expected. this landscape's been changed a great deal. So we know the site was used as a tip, as we can see in the early 20th century here, but we also know that the restoration works involved the importation of a lot of topsoil and Bing material. And we found a lot of starfine to begin with this rubber tyre, which was quite a lot of fun. But suffice to say, some of this information is really interesting. We found a lot of late 19th century, early 20th century hobnail boots. And we found a lot of material which might not have been out of place in a miner's kit, essentially. And we've treated this with a lot of care because we think this is a really interesting element of the site story as well. And I've been talking to Scottish Conservation Studio about what we can do with this, and we're confident they're pretty stable. So we think that this kind of material could actually go to a local archive, perhaps. So after a great deal of digging, huge amount of digging over many, many days, we got down and down, and boy did we go through a lot. Here's the section. It's a very large amount, incredible effort. And once we got through all this black stained material, it actually seeped down into archaeological levels. We did actually start to find the original shoreline. So you see this sandy, stony deposit coming down here, it's diving down. Well, this is what our geophysics was telling us about. We had a discrete band of stone here. And, you know, we only sampled part of it. It might turn out to be significant in the end. But we had this band of stone here leading down to this dropping face of the original shoreline. So the water was actually here. This is the interface with the boundary of the loch, yeah? And when we got down into this sand, we got some really interesting things coming out. So hopefully you can see this very yellow band here. I'll use my pointer so they're not going away. This yellow band here, this is really fine, grainy sand. This is a wind-blown sand. So we knew, the archaeologists and us discussing it, we knew we've come to when the loch was drained. Because when the loch was drained, there would be a lot of movement of soil blowing around the landscape. And this is sort of a classic thing you get. And immediately at that level and below it, we started to get a lot of medieval pottery. So we knew we were getting the midden material chucked out of the castle, rolled down the slope, and left there for us to find. And here's Veronica Lang with one of our really nice finds. This is just a cracker. It's probably the best bit of pot from the dig. It's got this rim fragment to it. And this is, you know, this is about this big, and we were chuffed to bits when Veronica was digging this out. And then you turn it over, it's got green glaze on one side, turn it over, really nice banded, wheel-thrown form to it. And it's seeping salt as well, so as we've been looking after it, that tells us a bit about what these pots were for, because when you get this kind of seepage of salt, it usually tells you what it's been stored in. So it's probably either transported fish, maybe oysters, who knows, even olives to the site. And here's the kind of comparable material. So you're talking reasonably early actually, 13th, 14th century. Again, this kind of Scarborough ware. This is a really nice, complete example from Loch Leven itself, which is actually at Blair Adam House today. And we've got about 60 sherds of this pottery as well, which has been looked at by a specialist as we speak. And here we are. Once we got right down into the clays and the sands, we actually were desperate to get down there. So we put some big slots along the edge of the trench to make sure we got it. And when we did, we were really pleased, because we got down into this really humic layer. So we were in the bed of the loch. And as we went down, we were pretty certain we were probably going down into a prehistoric age even. You know, that was our hope with this trench. One of the key aims of it was to tell us about the environment of the castle. Obviously we're not in the castle here, but it can tell us a lot about the world in which the castle developed. And so what we've done is we've taken these samples all the way down. These are called thin section samples, and they'll allow a specialist to do micromorphological analysis, which basically tells you how that soil got there. And it can also tell us a lot, the soil samples we've taken, about what species of plants were growing here. So what trees were about, whether domesticated barley was being grown nearby. So all of this will hopefully help us reconstruct the picture of the castle in a really interesting way. But that takes time. So what we've done so far is bring together all the data from the dig. We've put it in a report. So there's a whole range of specialists who'll be looking at this material. Key among those is the radiocarbon dating. So we took lots of samples of bits of burnt wood, bits of bone, and these samples are going to tell us scientifically how old some of these features were, tying that in with the pottery dates as well. So that's still to come. So beginning next year into February, March, we should be able to tell you about these findings. The soil analysis I mentioned. Let's find out what the place looked like, were there reed beds around the loch, for instance. We're also going to be having our pottery specialist giving us our spot dates. So we'll be able to tell perhaps more about exactly where these things came from. Were the continental imports? It's not impossible. These could have come from Northern Europe, for instance. And also our animal bone will tell us exactly what things people have been eating here. But we know they've got oyster shells and deer, but some of these bones could tell us a lot more about how domesticated animals were used at the site. So we'll keep you updated. Don't worry about that. We've got lots of avenues to do that. We've got lots of websites, information, reports online. But I wanted to close tonight, folks, by just giving you a sense of how much effort goes into a piece of work like this, and also just how much has been going on with this project over the years. In fact, I don't think there's been as much work happening around this site probably since the medieval period. There's been so many people in and out of the place that it's really starting to come alive again. So here's some of the stats we've got. Well, we had a lot of guys coming back to help us who were on our dig last year at East Lomond, and we're going to have another dig coming up next year as well. But this year we had about 40 people helping us all in, and they gave about 1,200 hours of their time. So, you know, I'm going to keep saying this, but thank you for that, because that's amazing. And also, we've engaged a lot of young people in this, so not just the old, but we've been working with schools. So, again, have a look at Bernarty Primary School guys' work. But we took a lot of schools onto site with us. So, we had help with a lot of volunteers with this. We gave them guided walks. So, we had Lochore Secondary School out with us. We had the Bernarty Primary School, we had Beith High School, and we had high schools come through to Dunfermline as well. So about 165 pupils. That's a great achievement, you know, really telling people about their history. And lots of different individuals coming as far as Bathgate, up from Kinross and Perthshire, and locally as well. Thanks for coming to see us, basically. Thanks for showing your interest in the project and having chats with us. Here's some of the local gents finding out about some more recent history. Some were miners, in fact, nearby, so they could tell us one or two things about the site. And I must mention some very important people. We had some archaeology ambassadors, we called them, but basically very nice people willing to give up a huge amount of their time to help us with this. So Joe Fitzpatrick here tonight, and Sue Keeley and Veronica, and Mary Clark as well, Veronica you heard of earlier. They really gave a massive amount to the project, leading tours and doing public talking, keeping me right and keeping all the archaeologists straight and answering questions when we weren't about. So thanks to you guys as well. Thanks for your time, and hopefully you got a sense of what we've been finding. Okay. Thank you.